Welcome to the studio on Building Tomorrow's Enterprise. My name is Mark Chillingworth. I'm joined today by Juan Villamil, CTO for the Department of Work and Pensions, Fergus Boyd, a hospitality consultant, Paul Coby, CIO with Johnson & Matthey, and Oliver Cronk, Chief Architect for EMEA at Tanium. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me in this discussion on Building Tomorrow's Enterprise. One thing I'd like to talk about is we hear a lot at the moment about startup businesses, born digital organizations. They have a huge advantage. They've just started on a Greenfield site in almost 100% of cases. You don't have that. You're responsible for large enterprises, established businesses. How does an established business, though, build new enterprises, new services, which we're also hearing you must do as business technology leaders, when you don't have that inherent advantage? How are you creating a greenfield effectively in what is not a greenfield site?
Can I
Go.
start? I've been fortunate enough to have worked in two major enterprises on British Airways, Virgin Atlantic, and a more of a legacy hotel company, and also two, I'd say, hospitality startups. The Hotel is one, and Village, I think, is a good example. I'm sure Paul will come to this too, but in British Airways, I think we had a very good idea back in the 1990, 2000. We created an internal startup. So basically, we gave a group of about 100 people as it scaled up to special privileges, special roles, special access to funds, protected them and let them exist within a bigger corporate. So the corporate became the mothership, and the little startup eventually became BritishAirways.com. I think it's still the best airline website in the world. I think a lot of other companies then began to realize this is a good model to follow. So in my more recent original startups, I'd say it has been hard, and it's more about the founder's vision and how long they can keep with the program. I think it's easier now because you can spin up servers in Cloud Wonderland on Google or Azure, whereas back in the day you had to buy tin and then ship it in and pay for tin and capital expenses. Yeah. So it's easier to try and fail fast these days. So pros and cons.
So I think when I think of this problem for ourselves, I actually see as a large enterprise ourselves, I see a lot of advantages that we have. We have lots of data, lots of market insight, lots of experience in serving the crowd that we support. And then we also have something that holds us back, which is typically for us is mindset, and it's people, it's that capability and how we think about it. So if we bring that into context, how do we then turn that into an advantage, and how do we create the agility that a startup will have? And in DWP, we tried a couple of approaches. We've tried, as Fergus was saying, where we started something we called it Innovation Dojo in DWP, which is about bringing divergent thinking into the enterprise and thinking out new ideas and new ways of serving the public. In an unconstrained way, creating that safe space to fail. And that's one of the things we tried. The other thing we tried as well is we took this new code type of approach. So rather than new code, old code, so rather than try to solve everything, because that's always one of the problems, we try to solve for everything. We've taken a small problem and said, if we were to do this in an absolutely new way, how would we go about solving for that specific problem? And then can that problem then scale across the entire enterprise? And how do we use that experience of that small space to win the mind share of the rest of the organization? Because that's the thing that will certainly hold us back.
I think, Mark, the key thing here is how do you create the conditions? How do you create a safe garden where these sort of delicate plants can grow, and the existing enterprise doesn't consciously or unconsciously crush them. So absolutely, as Fergus said, for BA.com, it was started outside and brought in. For johnlewis.com, we did the same. We found a warehouse that wasn't being used next door to Peter Jones, installed the .com in there. But the trick is then to bring it back into the mothership. And you've got to be prepared for some bumps on the way, because they've got new ways of working. And the reason you've grown this plant is then to change the overall enterprise. So how do you bring that in and ensure it's sufficiently mature and vigorous and got enough drive to actually change the way the overall business works, and I think that's the big challenge. In Johnson Matthey, we're trying a different approach, but at its heart, it's about how do you protect these experiments. So we've got something called a Competency Centre for Advanced Analytics, where we try proofs of concept in terms of new business models. We're testing out digital twins. We're testing out, in a very defined way, how you could apply analytics to one production facility. The trick is then, again, as with the BA and JL examples, how do you turn a successful experiment into something that transforms the whole organisation? And that's a real challenge.
Yeah, building on that, the danger, I think, with those innovation hubs or those little incubator units is they can become a toy shop very easily, right? So I've worked in a number of organisations where there have been digital teams or innovation units that have been created, and I get the points you're making about that they need the right environment to thrive, and the corporate immune system will, of course, kick in. But I think there's a piece around incentivization models as well as the organisation structure. It's one thing to create these things, but if you don't create the right incentive mechanisms for the organisation to get on board, the danger is the immune system does kick in, as in if you're rewarding the old behaviours and you want to transform not just your technology but your operating model and want it to be digital, you need to reward those behaviours and those ways of working that you want to promote. And this is what I've seen time and time again, is there's lots of investment in shiny technology, but if you're not thinking about how you're incentivizing and making the operating model work, these things will just become toy shops, unfortunately.
And I think the answer to that is ensuring that the key people in the business actually have a stake in and support those proofs of concept. So, it's not the IT or the digital function having a great idea and playing around, heaven forbid, with its toys. Yeah. It's, we're actually testing this. We need to optimize our production at our Macedonia AutoCAT facility, and this is really going to do it. And I think the trick with that is to agree with the business some milestones that, if we achieve this, we are then going to get behind this and we're going to roll this out through the whole of the world, etc.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. So when I think of the challenges I have in the current organisation, it's really, in the past, IT could almost be a silo and operate as a silo. We were a proxy for the business. We'll take a bunch of requirements and take those to market and solve things that way. And of course, the future isn't quite like that. We need to be part of the business. Yeah. We need to be with the business as part of this co-creation, ideation process. And we need to take the experience that we have in technology and the experience that we have in the business, put them together to solve those real problems. And that is an absolute massive challenge. Yeah. You're 100%. If you don't, that's the first thing you need to solve. You can no longer bring those ideas. You can no longer create those new things in that vacuum, in isolation of the rest of the business. You've got to solve for working with the business and being part of the business.
Just to add exactly to that, in Virgin Atlantic, I had the privilege to run an IT Light team. We borrowed from the work I did in British Airways under Paul. And we cycle people through. So we cycle people, good architects who would come through, good developers, who go back to the business, come into IT Light. But in IT Light, I created I call it suitability filter, a matchmaking filter, 20 items. So for instance, today's world, GDPR, we wouldn't touch a project to do GDPR or PII. But back then, we would be allowed to do such and such a thing. But the business knew that, and they signed off. So the chief engineer signed off, or the head of catering, whatever, were aware of the projects that we could do within that constraint. But I reported to the IT director, so it was part of the IT functions. We weren't a shadow IT. It's kind of fast and furious IT, but within constraints. So we'd never touch things that were payment related, PCI related, but things that could bring data to flight operations, big screens, and mashing data together. It makes sense. And then the idea was, for the better ones, after about a year, they would be migrated and hop across the air gap, as I called it, to the mainstream IT function and productionized properly with support processes. And a lot of ideas just got killed at that stage because they weren't suitable, they wouldn't scale. So that
sounds quite bimodal, to steal a Gartner term. So you have a...
Is it? I think they borrowed us.
Well, maybe they did, but you effectively have a
two-speed.
Kind of a startup mentality unit that then chucks things over. And I've seen very much sort of smoke and mirrors prototypes get mocked up in an innovation unit,
Yeah.
then get thrown over the fence to the production team, and they go, what the hell is this?
It have to be introduced properly.
So I think for me, doing this right is you do this in an iterative manner, where it's a minimum viable proposition that you can then build on, rather than something that's like a prototype, like a mock-up. Business gets excited about it, but then they don't realise what it's actually going to take to deliver it, either in terms of technology or in terms of the underpinnings, right?
I think DevOps has kind of worked on that, because basically if you write the code, you're responsible for it forever. So don't write nasty code. It's got to work.
It's got to be real, as you say. And I think, I agree with you, Fergus. I mean, the proof that it's working is we've got 5 projects this year that have been stopped, and we've got 4 that have gone mainstream. So if you can get that balance, it's kind of starting to work.